Picture a bird small enough to sit in your palm. It hatches, and just 6 weeks later, it's fully grown. That's quicker than a head of lettuce reaches harvest in most gardens. It lives happily in 1 square foot of space, roughly the size of a single dinner plate. It eats under an ounce of feed each day, about the weight of 5 paper clips. A female starts laying eggs at 6 weeks old, and she keeps laying close to 300 eggs a year. That's nearly 1 egg every single day of her life. She does all of it quieter than a sparrow on your windowsill. This bird is the quail. On paper, it sounds like the perfect farm animal. So here's the mystery. If quail are this easy to raise, why isn't everyone eating them? Why is chicken on every single plate instead? Stay till the end. The last part will completely change how you see the food on your table. Let's put the two birds side by side. A laying hen needs 4 to 10 times more space than a quail. A meat chicken takes 5 to 6 months to reach market weight. A chicken eats 3 to 4 ounces of feed a day, 4 times what a quail eats. And a rooster screams to the whole neighborhood every morning at 4 a.m., without fail. The quail wins in almost every category you can measure. It grows faster. It takes up less room. It lays more eggs for its body size. It's quiet enough for an apartment balcony. It even thrives in cities where chickens are banned. So how did the chicken take over the world? A bird that started as a wild, aggressive jungle fowl. A bird humans first kept for fighting and sacrifice. Today, over 73 billion chickens are eaten every year. That's almost 10 chickens for every human alive. And quail, they barely show up in the records at all. They get lumped in with ducks and turkeys. A statistical afterthought. Here's the twist. This has almost nothing to do with biology. The quail didn't lose because it was a worse bird. It lost because of a chain of historical accidents. Accidents that piled up in the chicken's favor over thousands of years. And this story reveals something uncomfortable about how we choose our food. The winner is almost never the best option. The winner is almost always the one that showed up first. Let's go back to where it all began. The chicken's secret weapon had nothing to do with food. It was aggression. Central Thailand, around 1500 BC. A wild bird called the red jungle fowl roamed the forest floor. It scratched through leaves looking for seeds. It wasn't meaty. A wild male weighed only about 2 pounds. The size of a small pigeon, and it wasn't gentle either. The males fought each other viciously. They slashed with sharp spurs on their legs. They puffed out shiny feathers and crowed through the jungle. To the early rice farmers, this bird was just a pest. It kept sneaking into the fields to eat their grain. But then humans noticed the fighting, and the fighting was spectacular. In 2022, researchers rewrote the chicken's whole history. A team led by Joris Peters in Munich studied old bones again. For decades, people believed chickens were tamed 10,000 years ago, but many of those old bones were misidentified. They actually belonged to wild birds, not chickens. The real evidence pointed to a much later date. The first true chickens appeared in Thailand around 1650 to 1250 BC. That's only about 3,500 years ago. The chicken showed up late to the party, and the trigger for it all was rice. When humans started farming rice, they created a giant food magnet. It pulled the jungle fowl out of the forest. Closeness led to familiarity. Familiarity led to capture. And capture led to domestication. But eating the bird wasn't the point. The earliest chickens were kept for ritual and fighting, not for meat, not for eggs. In ancient Greece, they were prized fighting animals. The Romans linked the rooster to Mars, their god of war. Cockfighting spread along trade routes across the world, from Thailand to Persia to Egypt to Europe. Eating chicken regularly came centuries later, almost as an afterthought. And this one detail changes everything. The chicken had a 2,000-year head start. 2,000 years spreading across the globe before anyone bred it seriously for food. It traveled from Bangkok to Beijing, through Mesopotamia and into the Nile Valley, across the Mediterranean and into northern Europe. By the peak of Rome, chickens were nearly everywhere. Not because they were the best food, but because they were already there. Now, what about the quail during all this time? The quail was living a completely different life. Wild quail had been eaten around the Mediterranean for ages, but there was one big difference. Quail were caught, not raised. Every autumn, huge flocks flew south for winter. They crossed the Mediterranean Sea in one exhausting flight. By the time they reached land, they were completely drained. They collapsed onto beaches, too tired to fly. People simply gathered them by the thousands with nets. It wasn't hunting, it was more like collecting. The birds practically fell into human hands. The quail even had its own Egyptian hieroglyph. It stood for a sound like the letter W. It appears in tombs over 4,000 years old. Egyptians painted quail being caught in nets and baskets. The Bible even describes quail feeding people in the desert. That's likely the same migration coastal people relied on. But here's the thing. Nobody farmed them. And why would they? The flocks arrived every autumn like clockwork. A free protein feast delivered right to the shore. You don't cage a food source that shows up on its own. And this is the moment the two paths split forever. The chicken was captured and bred because people wanted to watch it fight. That captivity slowly turned it into a domestic animal. The quail was never confined because it never needed to be. So the clock on quail domestication never even started. Now travel to the other side of the planet, Japan, around the 12th century. Here, people kept quail for a surprising reason. Not for food, for their song. Japanese nobles loved the male quail's trilling call. They held quail singing competitions, and they bred the birds for the beauty of their voices. For 800 years, quail were bred to sound nice in a cage. Not to grow fast, not to lay more eggs, just to sing. Meanwhile, the chicken kept spreading everywhere. Traders, soldiers, and settlers carried it across the globe, each flock drifting toward bigger bodies and more eggs. It wasn't until the 1910s that Japan bred quail for eggs. That push grew stronger during the Second World War. Japan encouraged quail farming to fight food shortages. After the war, quail egg production exploded across Japan. But by 1945, the chicken had a 3,000-year lead. Every barn, every feed, every tool was built for chickens. The quail showed up to a race that started before the pyramids. And the finish line was nowhere in sight. Now the story shifts from history to money. Because even starting fresh, the chicken would still win. And the reason is surprising. It comes down to how big the bird is when you process it. A market-ready quail weighs about half a pound, roughly the weight of a baseball. A market-ready chicken weighs 5 to 6 pounds, about the weight of a house cat. You need 8 to 12 quail to match one chicken. That sounds fine until you enter a processing plant. Every single bird goes through a dozen steps. Caught, crated, trucked and unloaded, stunned, cleaned, inspected, chilled, and packaged. And here's the problem. Those steps cost nearly the same for a tiny quail as a big chicken. A quail needs almost the same human handling as a chicken, but you get a fraction of the meat. Processing a chicken might cost about 3 cents per pound of meat. Processing a quail can cost 60 cents per pound. That's a 20-fold difference for the exact same product. 20 times more expensive pound for pound. And it gets worse. A chicken turns 70 to 75% of its weight into usable meat. A quail only gives about 60 to 65% because its bones and organs are bigger for its size. So the economics stack against the quail at every step. Then came the moment that locked the chicken in forever. It started with a grocery store contest in 1948. A huge American chain called A&P had an idea. They wanted a better chicken, one that grew faster and had more breast meat. They called it the Chicken of Tomorrow. Breeders from 40 states sent in their best birds. The contest ran for 3 years. The winners became the Cornish cross, the modern chicken you eat today. This new chicken reaches 6 pounds in just 42 days. That's the same time a quail takes to reach half a pound. The chicken is 12 times heavier at the same age. Suddenly, the quail's speed advantage vanishes. The chicken also crushed it on feed efficiency. It takes just 1.6 pounds of feed to grow a pound of chicken. Pork needs about double that. Beef needs 4 to 5 times more. And quail needs more feed than chicken too. So the quail is actually less efficient at what matters most, turning feed into cheap meat. That single number, 1.6, changed the world. It's why chicken can cost less than cheese. It's why fast food built empires on nuggets. The whole global industry was engineered around this one bird. Hatcheries now produce 500 million chicks a week. Plants run at over 2 birds every second. Then a man named Don Tyson changed the game again. In the 1960s, he pioneered vertical integration, one company controlling every single stage. The breeding, the hatching, the feed, the farms, the processing, and the shipping. The farmer just provided land and labor. The system was ruthlessly efficient. The price of chicken breast dropped by half. Chicken went from a Sunday luxury to an everyday default, into cafeterias, hospitals, and army rations. Now imagine trying to build all of that for quail. You'd need new incubators for tiny 10-gram eggs, new machines with miniature parts, new inspection rules for a bird a tenth the size, new packaging, new recipes, new cooking guides. All while chicken already exists at massive scale, with a 70-year head start on everything. Economists have a name for this trap. They call it path dependency. Once a system locks in, switching becomes too expensive, even if the alternative is clearly better. The perfect example is your keyboard. The QWERTY layout was designed in the 1870s. It was built to stop old typewriters from jamming. Typewriters have been dead for 50 years, but we still use QWERTY today. Not because it's best, because it was first. The chicken is farming's QWERTY keyboard. Not the best bird, just the first to lock everything in. But here's where the quail finally wins. In markets where it doesn't fight the chicken head-on. Japan produces over 2 billion quail eggs a year. You find them in bento boxes and ramen bowls, tucked into sushi and stacked on skewers. There, the quail egg isn't a novelty. It's normal. China went even further. Chinese farms make around 20 billion quail eggs a year. That's more than any country on Earth. They fill hot pots, night markets, and clay pot rice. Southeast Asia grows quail through small family farms. And in France, quail is pure luxury, roasted whole and served in fine restaurants. One quail dish can cost more than a whole rotisserie chicken, and these successes reveal the real secret. Every winning quail market found a niche chicken couldn't fill. The quail egg is a different product entirely, a single-bite treat with a creamy yolk. In France, it thrives as a luxury. On the street, it works as a quick snack on a stick. None of them tried to replace chicken as bulk meat. The ones that tried that always failed. The quail wins only when it stops pretending to be a small chicken. There's also a biological catch most people miss. Quail can fly. Modern chickens basically can't. The industrial chicken is too heavy to leave the ground. 70 years of breeding made it a ground-bound machine, and that turned out to be incredibly valuable. A bird that can't fly is easy to contain and handle, but the quail kept its wings and its instincts. When startled, quail rocket straight up into the air. Scientists call this flushing. In a barn of thousands, one loud noise sets them off. A slammed door, a dropped bin, a loud sneeze. Hundreds fly up at once and hit the ceiling, injuring or killing themselves on impact. This is a real leading cause of quail farm losses. Quail are also far more sensitive to stress. Light, noise, and strangers all rattle them. Stress hurts their eggs, growth, and health. Under crowding, they can even turn on each other. Chickens, after decades of breeding, stay calm through it all. The chicken was bred to accept confinement. The quail was not. In a real sense, the quail is still half wild. And factories are not a home for wild animals. But there's a growing movement that believes in the quail, not to replace the chicken in factories, but for a completely different kind of food system. The homesteading movement has embraced the quail. Driven by rising prices and supply chain worries, it's become the perfect beginner's livestock animal, especially for people with no land and no space. And the practical case is hard to argue with. Just 50 quail fit in 2 small cages, about the floor space of a small bookshelf. They produce 40 to 45 eggs a day, more than enough protein for a family of 4. They're ready to harvest in 6 to 8 weeks, quiet enough that neighbors won't even notice. And feed costs under $1 a day for the whole flock. The price of a single banana. For a family on a balcony or in a tiny apartment where chickens are banned, quail simply work. And hundreds of thousands of people are already doing it, raising food quietly outside the grocery system. There's a sustainability angle too. A 2019 study found quail create less waste per gram of protein, at least when raised outside of factories, and they breed so fast that improvement could come quickly. If real investment ever flowed into quail breeding, the bird could transform in a single decade. Faster growth, calmer birds, better efficiency. The raw potential is right there. The money and infrastructure are not. And that's the uncomfortable truth at the center of it all. The quail isn't losing because it's a worse bird. It's not losing because it tastes bad. Chefs actually consider quail richer and more flavorful. It's not losing because people tried it and hated it. Most people have never even been offered it fairly. The quail is losing because the food system is a machine, and machines don't chase the best product. They scale the product they already have. Changing the product means rebuilding the whole machine, a machine that processes 73 billion chickens a year. So think about your own kitchen right now. The eggs in your fridge, the chicken in your freezer, every one of them came from that same machine. A machine built not to find the best bird, but to scale the bird it already had. And this exact pattern repeats all through history. The best technology doesn't always win. The first one to reach massive scale wins. VHS beat the better Betamax tapes, gasoline engines beat early electric motors, QWERTY beat every faster keyboard, and the chicken beat the quail. Not because the alternatives failed, but because switching cost more than staying. So this was never really a story about a bird. It's a story about how we trap ourselves in old choices. A chain of accidents stretching across thousands of years. from rice fields luring jungle fowl in Thailand, to nobles breeding singing quail in Japan, to a grocery contest in 1948, all of it cascading into the world we live in now, where one bird feeds 8 billion people, and the other sits in a cage in a spare bedroom. So the real question isn't why we don't eat more quail. The real question is much bigger. How many of our systems run on choices made by accident? From the food we raise to the energy we burn, to the very way we build our cities. As resources shrink and pressure grows, the cost of staying locked in is finally too high, because the quail is still right there. 6 weeks to grow, 1 square foot to live, 300 eggs a year, waiting patiently for a world ready to ask the question you just heard.